Welcome to episode 22 of the Haxton Knits channel. My name is Deanna and I'm an American living in Okinawa, Japan. It is late summer here in Okinawa, which means maybe I've seen the first hint of fall, but I'm not ready to call it fall yet because it is definitely still shorts and t-shirt weather. However, what does it mean to be late summer in Okinawa? Well, the humidity has started to lift a little and the sun's intensity is a little bit less there. So this is actually the time of year when I tend to spend more time at the beach and in the water, snorkeling and doing all of those sorts of water activities that I think most people think of as high summer. For me personally, it's best done in the fall here in Okinawa, where the feels like temperatures are finally out of the 90s and hundreds. So what do I have in store for you this week? Well, first of all, I want to apologize because I think we're going to have a noisy episode. I have kittens at my feet today. Oh, here is Cyrilla, who is trying to chew on every piece of knitting that I have next to me and that I want to share with you. So, this time of year is what I affectionately like to call frogging season. And that is because I just sort of fall into this slump where there's no more of the inertia of winter carrying me on for knitting all of the warm and fuzzy sweaters and blankets. And I tend to, in the desire to want to keep knitting, I'm having kitten issues. What I end up doing is casting on a lot of things and frogging a lot of things because I lose inspiration or I lose motivation to keep working on them. And these last few weeks have been no exception. So I've had, I think, 3 projects fall by the wayside due to frogging. Oh, kitten, hold on. We're gonna show you what my kitten is up to right now while she's trying to help me, okay? Girls. Stop. No, don't chew on the knitting needles. No. Don't chew on the knitting needles. Trouble. It's going to be trouble today. So the first project that I think I maybe mentioned to you in our last episode that has fallen to the frogging is my contribution to the Stubborn Stash knit along. So here on this channel and over on the Ravelry Group, we have a knit along running through the end of October where you are challenged to get that stubborn ball of yarn out of your stash and finally make something with it. And I don't know if it's just my late summer knitting funk or trying to force a pattern when the inspiration isn't there, but I have now cast on 2 separate projects and frogged 2 separate projects in the course of this make along. So here is my yarn, which you are all familiar with now, all now in hand wound balls because it's been frogged. It's funny, I still have my knitting needles in here because I refuse to give up on this idea of getting this yarn knit, but I think it may be time to call it. So the first project that was knit with this is the Peplum cardigan, and that one was turning out really well, but I just had to admit that I was running out of yarn, and it was really a pattern that needed a nice, like, sumptuous, fuzzy, lovely, pretty yarn. So I went ahead and frogged that one, and then I cast on the cropped, I think it's called a cropped pullover sweater. And I got that one actually almost completely done. I sewed up parts of it and put it on, and just had to admit that I didn't love the way it fit, and it just wasn't something I was going to wear. So it also, alas, was frogged. I'm leaning towards like a big bulky weight shawl or wrap or something like that, but I actually have quite a few shawls and wraps on the needles right now, and that's unusual for me. I'm not usually much of a shawl or wrap knitter, so my fear is I'm gonna cast on another one and it's just gonna end up in a corner somewhere and I'm never going to use it. The second item that fell prey to the frogging season, well, you guys didn't even get to see it, but I had the inspiration to cast on a shawl, and I had a bunch of these lovely singles. These are Madeline Tosh singles that I purchased. I think they were having a big clearance or a go out of business or a change in business model sale going on, and I ended up with a lot of these. This is just one of each color that I was looking at. And I was planning on combining these guys with the gradient kit that I won from my participation in Sock Madness, which was this Wonderland Yarns gradient. So I actually got started with a shawl pattern. I thought I would just write myself a shawl pattern and knit that up. And it probably got about, maybe this deep, this wide, before the frogging season lack of inspiration hit, and I just went ahead and took it apart. So alas, there's much frogging done on this episode, but that doesn't mean I don't have knitting progress to share with you. And the first thing that I wanted to show you was my work on my Great Tapestry. Now I know it's been a few weeks, but this was an image that I put into Stitch Fiddle and decided I was going to knit up as a piece of knitted artwork to hang on the walls of my house. And I've really wanted to get it done, so I've been pushing hard to work on it, and I've gotten a lot of progress in the last couple of weeks or so. So this project is being made with 3 colors. I'm working stranded color work. I am in some cases catching my floats, and in other cases doing a jacquard ladder back float or catch in the back for color management. And it's interesting, as I've been working on this at several points I've thought, well, it's long enough now I could turn it into a skirt, and then I wouldn't have to keep working on it. And then at another point I thought, oh, well, I can make this a dress now, and then I won't have to keep working on it. But I am excited that it's coming along. I've held it up a couple of times to my picture frame to see how close I am in my progress. Full disclosure with this project, this is not an original image to me. I started this project just as an experiment to see if I would be able to create a knitted piece of artwork. And so what I started doing was just browsing at Google image search. I typed in winter trees sketch. And I thought maybe if it were a sketch, that it might work better for knitting purposes. If you've ever tried to plug a picture into knitting software, you'll find quickly that you're going to end up with 25 colors. So the picture has to be pretty simple, not a lot of colors. Otherwise, you get into this tricky spot where you're trying to either do stranded color work or intarsia or embroidery or something to manage all the colors you need. But the project is actually going along really well. I've been thinking about what I would do different if I were going to start this project again. And I think one of the things I didn't think about when I started was how much the weight of the material is going to sag over time. I'm going to kind of stretch it across this giant picture frame that I have, but still with no anchor points in the middle, it might still kind of sag, and I'm worried about that. I've been thinking maybe I can get some of that adhesive Velcro and just kind of put it in a grid pattern so that it has sort of a point to grab onto the yarn and help prevent it from sagging. That's something I might be working on. And it's interesting, I'm so excited about this project. I really wish I had started with a smaller image just to get the trial and error things over and done with before I'm, 90% into this huge 400 line pattern. So if I were going to do this again, things that I would think about are gauge. So I think I would knit a much tighter gauge to make a denser fabric that maybe would be less likely to drape or sag as it's hanging up in a picture. But it's funny because I still have a long way to go with this project, and I've been kind of dreading it because it's such a big project. But I'm also still already really excited about casting on another knitted picture. I think this time around we'll pick a much smaller picture frame than the giant one that I picked, but I've already picked out the image that I want to use. This is actually, maybe I'll put this image up here for you, but it's a picture of Shuri Castle on the night that it caught fire and burned down recently. I thought it would be interesting to knit that one up, and then maybe I could auction it off and donate the money to the charity that is collecting money to rebuild that Shuri Castle site. So excitement, maybe there will be more knitted artwork. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks here you'll be able to see this project finished. It is of course knit in the round and steeked, so I still have to secure the steeks, cut it, wash it, block it, and find a way to mount it to this picture frame. And of course, I think the next project, I'm going to use a much smaller picture frame, and I may be able to just kind of go about my house and find a picture I don't like and use that frame, or maybe go to a thrift store and something like that, so I don't have to purchase a new frame. So more to come with that project. My next work in progress, which has actually gotten quite a bit of love this week, is the much promised knitting with my own homespun yarn. This is, of course, the Night Shift by Andrea Mowry, which is a beautiful slip stitch color work shawl. I am totally and helplessly tangled as I'm trying to pull this out and show it to you. But of course, this is all done in my own handspun yarn. All right, so this is knit in almost exclusively Nest Fiber Club fibers. I've mentioned before that when I was pretty new to spinning, that I purchased a lot of fiber clubs, and I very quickly got overwhelmed by the amount of fiber coming in. In fact, I still have maybe 1 or 2 more skeins. Nest Fiber Club February 2018 sitting here. I think this actually might be the very last of my Nest Fiber Club yarn, and depending on how big this project turns out, I may get into that in order to finish it off. We shall see. But as I showed you last time, I'm using 3 main colors for this project, and they're all in very similar color families here. So this one is just sort of a purple and green. This is definitely green, minty green, emerald green, and sort of everything in between. And then this is more of a blue to green. So purple to blue, green, blue to green. And then I'm using just odds and ends, various other hand spun bits and pieces that I have to make the contrast colors. So we'll just keep working away on that really until I run out of yarn, or until I can't be bothered to keep going any farther. I have dreams of this being a huge shawl. And of course, as it is with triangular shaped shawls, you start at one end and things just sort of fly by until you get about this far in, and then as it continues to grow, the rows get longer and longer and longer, and you start dreaming of finally casting off. So this project will be on the needles for a little while. I have placed it into my car and called it my car project. So now that I am off of my staycation and back to work, I'll have more opportunities to work on my car project. And of course, last but not least, for my works in progress, this week I have the Portage Cardigan, and I am nearing the finish line. I can see the finish line approaching on this project. So this guy is knit in Malabrigo Arroyo in the glitter colorway. Yes, it is knit in one single yarn, color, and colorway. It just so happens that the batches I bought were very different. They said no dye lot, so I don't know what I could have done about it, but I did end up with a very gold color and a more green-brown color. And in this light, it's coming out quite a bit more like pea green and olive green than it really is. It is more of a golden brown green. We'll forgive the lighting for this project, but I do have the back, the sleeves, the neckband is completely done except for they ask for a sewn bind off, and I'm not sure if I'm actually going to do that or not. So this is a garter stitch. I'm calling it a button band, but there's no buttons. It's the button band and the neckband. Usually I will use a sewn bind off for 1x1 ribbing, which is what I did on the bottom of this project. Here's the bottom hem with my 1x1 rib and a sewn tubular bind off. But I don't usually use that for garter stitch, and I'm not really sure it's going to be necessary. So right now I just have all of these stitches on hold, waiting for me to decide whether I'm going to do a sewn bind off or something else. we'll see. I read a lot of the comments on Ravelry, and everyone said that they did wish they had done a more stretchy bind off, so it's something I may try a bind off and then end up pulling out and then trying again. And my favorite thing about this pattern is that it has pockets. So when you pick up your button band, you end up knitting this extra little flap, which you end up folding back and sort of tacking down to create this pocket, which is going to be a little bit tricky to see since it's not actually tacked down yet, but we'll go here like this. I have not finished the sleeves yet. I have them all tucked under because it's a raw edge inside there. I'm waiting to see how much of the gold yarn and how much of this sort of green-brown yarn I have left over. The sleeves may end up being 100% gold, and I do want to make them a little bit longer. It's interesting, the pattern says that it's written for an extra long sleeve, but when I knit as far as it said to knit before starting the cuff, I found that it was still pretty short. So it's also a thing that I might wash and block just to see how much the length grows before I make the final decision on how long to make those cuffs. Sometimes with these projects I will end up sort of doing a quick block maybe once or twice during the project process. I did in this case about partway down this back stop and put it on waste yarn and block it because I was afraid it was going to be too small, and then once I blocked it, this stitch pattern really opened up and bloomed and relaxed out, and I was able to continue on with the size I had already cast on. So this is always a piece of advice I have for people, is if you're not sure if you're going to frog something because you're worried about the way it fits or you're worried about the way it drapes, before you frog it, just put it onto some waste yarn and go ahead and block it and see what it does. And if you like what it does, then you know, well, I can just keep on going and I don't have to frog it. So that is the Portage Cardigan, which hopefully also I will have done for you next week. This is really good timing. I feel like I've worked on this all through the summer, and now that fall is just about here, I'll be able to wear this throughout this whole fall and winter season in Okinawa. That is all that I have for you for works in progress this week, but let's move on to life in Okinawa. Of course, I always have to start with our COVID updates. We've actually had a relatively small number of cases on island, and we're continuing to decrease. And it's interesting because I haven't really felt like I've seen that many businesses close. When I'm driving home from work, I'm still seeing like the bars open, and I don't know how to explain that. I can hypothesize that, Japan is already sort of a mask wearing culture, and so it's not that unusual, even before COVID times, to see people wearing masks when they're sick or when they don't want to get sick while traveling or at large events. So the mask advice of wearing masks was, almost universally and unquestionably enforced. People would just wear their masks, and they definitely look at you if you don't have your masks on, although it's not really in the Japanese culture to be confrontational or say anything to you. But definitely mask wearing culture. Also, here in Japan, you don't shake hands as much as you do in the US. In fact, I think all in all, out in public, social physical contact is a lot smaller than it is in the United States. So I think those are both contributory factors into why the COVID cases have been a little bit less here. But even with COVID restrictions in place, we were able to enjoy a small staycation. We were able to go paddleboarding, which is something I've never done before, stand-up paddleboarding. We started out, with just on the river, making no waves, very easy beginner entry-level stand-up paddleboarding, but I quickly fell in love with it. It's absolutely just sort of an addicting little hobby pastime. I don't know if I would call it a sport. I think I would have to get out into some bigger waves and try like the surfing aspect of stand-up paddleboarding to call it sport, but it's been a fun process here. I'm looking forward to using the paddleboard to get out to more snorkeling sites. Like, I really like going out to some of the reefs, and sometimes you have to swim out a little bit, and so having that paddleboard might make that process a little bit more fun. I'm very lucky that Okinawa is practically paradise, so even when I'm having a staycation, it's I don't feel like I'm missing out in any way. We also spent some time doing some sightseeing. Surprisingly, there were a lot of sites I have never visited before. I mentioned that I've lived here in Okinawa before, so this is actually marking the end of my 5th year on this island. And even though it's a small place, I keep finding more places to explore that I haven't before. One of the places I visited was the Royal Garden, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So this was it was built as, I think, like a vacation home or a second home for the Ryukyu kings, kind of in the Shuri era. And it's just a beautiful garden. Unfortunately, the entire site was destroyed during World War II in the Battle of Okinawa, but has recently been finished as a reconstruction and just beautifully done. So you come in, you get to walk around the gardens and see all of these restored buildings. But they did a beautiful job just restoring the gardens and reconstructing the houses. And it's just a really interesting way. I think what's really awesome is that because it's a reconstruction, you're allowed to go into these spaces, whereas a lot of the surviving buildings, they won't let you in. So it's like, look from a distance, but don't touch and don't go walking around inside. Whereas here, because it's all newly rebuilt, you can go in and walk around and get a sense of what it's like to live in this style of house here in this weather. It's very much in the Okinawan style, so there's every room basically is into open air in some way. There's no closed off rooms with no airflow, or else it would just be miserable and hot. So just a beautiful place, a lovely way to spend an afternoon. Also, while on vacation, we did some very boring things like getting our cats fixed and just general upkeep of the house and home. Hence, we are in a little bit of a new space as I rearrange some furniture and hopefully improve the lighting a little bit. I think that's actually going to be it for this episode. It is a little bit of a short episode. I mentioned, it's the end of summer knitting funk, and I don't feel like I have a lot of new content to share with you. So hopefully you guys are having a great summer. I'm very jealous of those of you who are moving finally into sweater weather. I keep seeing pictures popping up of people knitting by the fire and casting on sweaters, and I am hoping that any day now I'll be able to catch that, wintertime bug. Also, hopefully coming up next week, you will see the final installation of the Amirisu Yarn Club. So I should be receiving that this week, and I'm looking forward to sharing all of those new yarny things with you. As always, if you want to follow me, you can catch me on Instagram and on Ravelry as Haxton Knits, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time.